Well, welcome everybody. Today we have a very special guest in the name of Mr. Sean Mitchell. Sean Mitchell from you guys from YouTube will definitely know who he is. He talks all things EV, Tesla in particular, but is not limited there. We've had the special fortune of having him on our show today because he lives here in Colorado. He was able to come right to the studio and talk with us. So today we're going to cover, I want to cover coronavirus and how that affects supply chains, the much anticipated Model Y. In addition to that, if we can get into energy, Saudi Arabia, Russia, why not?
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. So this coronavirus thing, I don't, have you heard about it?
What? That's a beer
Yeah,
mix, maybe?
it's the lime that gives you the stomach ache afterwards.
Apparently, they have not dropped in sales, Corona. We just Googled this last night.
But
they're
have
doing
they
just
risen
fine
in sales. That's
sales-wise.
the question. Have they grown in sales?
5%.
Okay.
Yeah, not a lot, but
That's a measurable uptick when it could be a pronounced downward trend.
right.
You do need something to do if you're self-quarantined in your house, so I'm surprised that it's not higher.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, maybe that'll come, huh?
So the topic that a lot of people have been kind of curious about, and it seems like daily the numbers are changing. You know, whether that's the statistical numbers, the protocol is changing daily, et cetera. And something interesting to probably your viewers and our viewers and listeners is this idea of, with these markets getting hammered like this and the closures, the sort of random closures of all sorts of things, how do you feel like this is affecting Tesla and the supply line and so on?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. In fact, if I get some time when I get back home today, I'll probably record a video about this. But I think 30,000 foot perspective, short term, something like this is probably pretty manageable for markets and businesses. If this goes on for more than a couple of months, I think we've got some pretty big problems economically. There's people that have thrown around the R word, recession, and about this sort of entering in the next recession. Hopefully not. Hopefully, well, there's a ton of very, very smart people working on reducing the impact not only on people's health but also the economic impact. But if you go down to maybe like a 10,000 foot view or ground level, I've given a lot of thought to how this impacts Tesla in particular, or maybe let's scale out a little bit and say the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. To me, this is really, really interesting as someone who follows this as sort of a hobby and a passion project. How does the coronavirus impact the automotive industry? There's lots of ways that you could sort of slice the cake, but one of the things that I think is interesting is how this could potentially accelerate accelerate electric vehicles. You have this global supply chain that the automotive industry is reliant upon, and many other industries as well. But since I talk a lot about electric vehicles, you have this supply chain that involves parts and pieces, and more importantly for this conversation, it's batteries. Batteries is sort of the primary component at the moment. The automotive industry is very reliant on Asia for battery supply. You have raw materials that come from different parts of the world, but then they sort of get shipped to Asia for processing and then building these batteries. Japan and Korea and China in particular. An event like the coronavirus definitely is quite disruptive to automotive manufacturers making these electric vehicles. What I think is probably going to happen, depending on when this episode comes out, you may or may not be able to watch a video where I'll go into a lot more detail about this, but I plan on putting this video out sometime this afternoon after this recording here. But I think this is going to drive this idea of centralizing supply chain a little bit more for electric vehicles. Here's the big difference. automotive manufacturer can create a gasoline vehicle, and they're not so much reliant on the fuel source to be able to sell the vehicle. That's sort of post-purchase. But with an electric vehicle, the big difference is you can't sell that vehicle. It's not sellable if you don't have the batteries. And if you have a coronavirus or something that's disrupting the markets, it can significantly hurt automotive manufacturers from creating those. So and selling the vehicles. So if you centralize the supply chain and you start to have automotive manufacturers think about how to control a little bit more of that supply chain from a continent perspective, I think what you have Tesla doing by creating these gigafactories on each continent will prove to be, in hindsight, a really smart strategy for battery supply in particular, but building vehicles.
Absolutely. That and it isn't it true? Like you're saying, consolidate the supply chain. Clearly, there's not an equal distribution of natural resources throughout the planet. It's some things are concentrated. I believe like cobalt is concentrated in China and things like that. How do they go about centralizing that, or what have they done? What has Tesla done specifically to centralize those resources?
Yeah, there's a lot that probably isn't known to the general public or someone that doesn't follow Tesla as closely, but Tesla actually controls their entire supply chain. Other automakers would rely on a company like Panasonic or LG Chem to control that supply chain. But one of the things that's really important with Tesla is to ethically source the raw materials, and they've explicitly said this in papers that they publish. They don't buy conflict minerals.
Interesting.
So they go through great lengths to make sure that they're not buying raw materials that are coming from places like Congo, where you have these child labor, and really really dark and sad places. Controlling the supply chain, they've already got that down to a sense. What they don't control is, at the moment, the production of the cells. So Panasonic controls that in Giga, Nevada. And then you have some of these other companies that will help them execute.
Although that dynamic's changing, right?
It's starting to change. Yeah. It's starting to change.
With Panasonic in particular.
Yeah, here's my prediction with this, and this is something that is ever evolving, and we'll know a lot about with the Battery Investor Day. Yeah. But I think that they're going to need, and this is another video concept that you're getting some insight into my brain here. What I think is going to happen is they're going to need every single major battery producer, plus them getting into the battery production business to be able to execute on the demand that they have for their vehicles and for their stationary storage. So they've got to figure this out. So there's two pieces that they don't control right now. Number one is the actual mining of the raw materials. Right now, they buy the raw materials.
And they've talked about potentially moving into that market as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then they also don't control at the moment the production of the cells. Once Panasonic creates or produces those cells, then Tesla takes those and puts them into modules and battery packs and puts them in the car. So you have these sort of, there's three phases of that battery pack. There's the raw materials that come from the mine. You also have the processing of the raw materials, but I would loop that into the production of the cells, and then you actually have making of the battery pack. So Tesla's got to figure that out. I suspect that they're probably going to want to try and control as much of that process as possible for one primary reason. Well, two primary reasons: to control a little bit more of their own destiny in terms of markets and costs. You're subject to cost of the market. Whatever the market for nickel and cobalt is, that's going to impact your profit margin on your car and the cost of the car. So if they can control a little bit more of that.
Is there a lot of variability in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit manic.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, cobalt, nickel in particular, I believe, is the most expensive raw material in the batteries that they use. Cobalt, as I understand it, is a derivative of nickel. So you have those two. And then Lithium, as I understand it, is one of the most affordable parts of the battery cell. So, if I were just to take a stab in the dark, if they were going to get into the mining business, buy a mine or mines plural, I probably would guess that it would be nickel, that they would buy a nickel mine.
Yeah.
And remind me the name of the mineral that's coming out of the Congo.
It's cobalt.
Cobalt, right? So right now, a lot of that's coming from Australia and whatnot. Is that?
I don't know where Tesla in particular is buying their cobalt. Based on what I know, it's probably not Congo. It's probably from somewhere else.
And they're gunning for cobalt free in time. Is that?
Yeah. I think now their batteries are something like an 811. So nickel 8 to 1 to 1. So nickel is mostly nickel, and then you have manganese, and then cobalt. So it's something like that. There's a derivative of that. They've got some different chemistries for different purposes, but I think it's nickel, manganese, and cobalt. But at some point, very soon, they'll probably work out the cobalt completely.
Yeah, and do you think that will any of that? Do you anticipate any big change in that formula with the Maxwell technologies? Do you think that that's going to? I mean, we're all sort of stabbing in the dark there with that, but there seems to be the indication there's going to be some order of magnitude change in the capacity.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've got a video idea planned for this at some point this week. I think the innovations are probably going to be, partially it's implementing Maxwell technology, which is this dry electrode. So you remove a portion of the process where you have to send these sheets through a drying process. So you reduce the cost that it takes and the time that it takes to send these sheets through the drying process because it's ready to go. And then the chemistry that they've got, as I understand it, is also an improvement in energy density as well. So there's some innovation there. It's known that Tesla's energy density is somewhere around 250 to 270 watt hours per kilogram, and
that's impressive.
Maxwell has 300 today with a path to 500.
Jeez.
So you're going to get some right out of the gate some efficiency in range and energy density, but I think there's some room there. So I think there's innovation there, and then you've also got these leadings of them buying Hibar, which fills the battery cells with the chemistry.
What is Hibar?
Hibar is a part of the manufacturing process of the actual cells.
Okay.
Based out of Canada, or they were based out of Canada. So I think that they bought the technology. It's you can go to their website. They've got videos, I think even on YouTube, where they show this automated process of filling the actual cylindrical cells with the chemistry.
Interesting.
So
cool.
So it seems like they're working on producing their own. So I think that will probably be another piece of this. Probably not in large scale. I think that they'll probably start at their higher cost, higher margin vehicles like their S and their X, produce their own cells for those, and then eventually at some point roll it out into their other vehicles. So that's the other piece. And then the third piece, this is actually good for me to talk this out because I'm actually talking out my outline for this video.
Please, practice away.
While we're recording here. So the third component is to leverage every single battery production company on Earth that can execute on it. So I think that they're going to pull from Panasonic, LG Chem, CATL, and any others to be able to execute on this massive need for producing of battery cells.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do they already have a relationship with LG for their Chinese factory, or am I mistaken?
I think that there were some rumblings of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there were some rumblings of that. It sounds like with CATL, it's going to be specifically for prismatic batteries in their standard range Model 3s. So
Okay.
that leaves, if they're selling other vehicles, maybe not necessarily producing, but if they're selling other vehicles in other markets and they need LG Chem, then they're probably going to. Actually, I think that they did do an agreement. I think that there was a formal agreement.
I believe
with
that's
LG Chem.
true too.
Yeah.
I don't know any of the details of it, but I do recall reading that.
I heard Elon say something in some interview.
Maybe that was.
The
And
third row one.
it might have been.
Mhm.
And they were like, they're basically the same cells, right? And he goes, yeah, but basically the same, and the same is very different.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So to wrap this full circle, it sounds like Tesla had already gone to great lengths to get their supply chain hammered out in advance of this, and I think it sounds like you're saying that this might help them to weather the storm of the coronavirus. And as I'm reading, I believe even China right now is they're peaking, or at least it looks like their coronavirus is
Plateauing.
yeah, exactly. So that's good for Gigafactory 3, Gigafactory 4, right? No, 3
for China.
Yeah, China for 3. So it does sound like their diversification and their supply chain is intact and will only probably benefit them moving forward in this pandemic.
It's gonna level out the chance that the cost of vehicles will be disrupted by commodities like raw materials, because those can fluctuate. In fact, if you go to a commodities website and you type in lithium or nickel, they can be very manic in price.
Exactly.
And you need standardization, and you need sort of a leveling of the cost to make things more predictable. So centralizing the supply chain on a continent basis, I think, gives an automaker like Tesla, and probably other automakers that want to follow in their footsteps, a little bit more of a predictable output of electric vehicles.
That makes perfect sense. You're not, while there will always be geopolitical issues for as long as there's humans on Earth, clearly if you can be self-sustaining in one hemisphere and not impacted by the other, that promises to be a profound paradigm shift in how EVs will be produced. So we've got this thing called the Model Y. You've heard about that, right?
I think so. Sounds familiar.
They started delivering this past weekend. You got any good intel on those yet? You had a chance to touch one?
I was at the Model Y event.
Oh, the unveil.
A year ago
Oh,
on
sweet.
the 15th. We're recording a few days after the 15th, but it was actually a year ago. And
Okay.
So I had the good fortune of being there. It's exciting. It's exciting to see that they're so far ahead of what they initially said when they were going to start delivering their vehicles. So that's really exciting. I really do hope that Tesla's figured out how to underpromise and overdeliver, because that's been, as someone who's got an interest in Tesla, and I know a lot of other investors feel this way. Missing your deadlines is a bad idea.
Absolutely.
It's a bad thing in many ways. It's frustrating. It's confusing. It makes you look like you don't know what you're doing, and so I really do hope that.
Doesn't it seem like that memo has been gotten?
I hope so.
Yeah, it's the impression I get as well.
I hope so. So
Fingers crossed.
yeah, the Model Y I think is going to be far better selling than the Model 3. There's more functionality. You have a hatchback. I mean, that was one of the complaints of Model 3 owners, no hatchback. So you've got that. You've got just a gorgeous interior all-glass roof, which sitting in the second row, which is where I sat when I got my test ride
Ooh, what was that like?
at the event. Here are some things as a taller guy I really appreciated. So I'm 6'1". It was far easier to get into the Model Y than it was my Model S and a Model 3.
Interesting.
You sort of sit down into a sedan, whereas the Model Y, you sort of sit into it, and sort of slide into it's a better way to put it. So there's less of an effort there to get in and out of the vehicle. But sitting into the second row was really neat because you have what current Model S owners would be familiar with the all-glass roof. They've essentially taken that and they've put it into the Model Y. So when you're sitting in that second row, it just feels incredibly spacious. There's plenty of headroom, and you have all of that glass, which just makes it feel very airy and bright. So I really do love that. I love the hatchback.
I think it's powered, by the way, too, isn't it? That hatchback.
Yes, yeah, power
Very
liftgate.
cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's going to do incredibly well here in Colorado in particular. I've tried to keep a close eye on it as I've seen trucks come into the Denver area to drop those vehicles off.
I don't know if I told you my story, but we just got my wife's Model 3 in December, and have just, I've already talked about it ad nauseum, so I won't go into that detail, but it's been magical for us. It's a game changer. And I, of course, put my name in the hat for the Cybertruck, and then just recently, within the last 3 weeks, I put in an order for a Model Y, and it wasn't the performance; it was a long-range all-wheel drive because we live up here in the mountains. Gray, I forget the name of the new rims or whatnot, but the new rims. And and when I did it, I could easily do it because I was like, well, that's a year and a half away.
Yeah.
Because there's like 300,000 or 250,000 orders, or I don't even know what the number is on it, but it's some multiple of hundreds of thousands of orders. So me doing the basic math in my head, I'm going, okay, if they build 5,000 a week, blah, 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 we're a long way down the road. Well, about 4 days ago, I get an email from Tesla saying, prepare because it's coming.
Yeah.
That email that you go in and you put in your insurance and all your, how you're going to pay for it, et cetera, which means that, at least with my wife's car, that meant that it was like 4 weeks out. And I haven't gotten any intel on it. They said that they'll be getting in touch with me soon with a VIN number, and then they'll be able to give a date. But any reason why maybe I am sidestepping hundreds of thousands of other orders? Is it a color combination? If they or is it like people who maybe were in leases that when Tesla went and said October now to March, that must have put a few people in a tailspin in a good way, or?
Well, we know that Tesla in the past has prioritized the higher priced vehicles first. So that could be it. That's one thing. The other thing that we don't know is how many vehicles have they produced already. So they could have been producing these things since December or January.
Yeah.
And they could have a huge stockpile. I would imagine we probably would have heard about that if so. Where are they storing them? But that could be another thing. They could have just produced so much that they're ready to fulfill, tens of thousands of orders immediately.
That's what I would hope is occurring. Well, either way, none of it looks ominous. It was just interesting to me that place the order and boom, here it comes, dude.
I would also think that a mixture of the order potentially coming early and everything going on in the world with coronavirus, at least for me, it would give me pause on, am I ready to pull the trigger on this yet? I was expecting it in a year or.
Yeah, it looks like it's one of those things that's probably a number of factors are.
It could be a little bit of marketing or PR from Tesla's part. To send these emails out, getting people to talk about it. And it sounds like they haven't said specifically when this is going to be delivered. So they're not making any promise that it's going to be delivered anytime soon. They're just saying get prepared for it. So you could be waiting another couple of months or 6 months.
But it would still be fine for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there could be some Tesla marketing magic there.
Yeah.
They could be utilizing that, especially if they know that quarter one is not going to be a stellar quarter for them performance-wise.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of it. They've been known to do things like that. In fact, last year, I think it was actually a year ago at the end of March, they knew that they were going to have a terrible Q1. And so to lessen the blow, they did an event. I think that they did their autonomy event, if I remember correctly, and then they also announced the $35,000 Model 3 much sooner than what I think people were expecting. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that they could be leveraging some of that to lessen the fact that they may not have they've already said that Q1 is not going to be great, but with the coronavirus, it could be disrupting even more.
Sure.
Well, funny, I want to come back to that. I want to come back to the idea of the battery day in particular and how that might be leveraged if we're having a particularly shitty stock market right now and for the foreseeable, if we are getting near that R word, if they could, remember how we talked about that, how the battery day will only be when they want it to be because they've got, at the time, Corona was just, it was just coming on our radar. So the markets were still doing just fine. And my thoughts were that they'll do battery day when it is absolutely optimal for them and no sooner. Well, that seems like a pretty damn optimal time to bring about some really, earth-shattering battery news.
Yeah. Although I felt like Autonomy Day was earth-shattering. We're making it shit from the ground up, and the market really didn't respond to it.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I think people pay more attention to battery than they do autonomy. I think autonomy is too much of an abstraction, maybe.
Probably average Joe, because we're even me who cares about this probably disproportionately from the average. I still care about that big number of mileage that I get, like how many miles
Exactly.
range. Even though now that we own one, I see that that's far less important. I don't know if you feel that same way, but the big number to me does not mean as much. It maybe means accoutrements. I can keep on the heater, or I can do,
Yeah, I think the Autonomy Day, I felt like when I was watching that, it very quickly, they went super deep. And, when they're talking about teraflops per second, it starts to go over my head a little bit.
I do that every night before I go to bed. It's awesome. Oh, wait, I have teraflops. Is that what it is? I don't know.
So I could, in general, I think that analysts from institutional investment firms, this is a new topic for them. They're used to traditional automotive, and the vernacular is a little bit different with electric vehicles. So I understand why markets didn't necessarily react. I see the same disconnect when some of these investors on the quarterly calls are asking some boneheaded questions. You can tell that they don't follow things as closely as maybe some enthusiasts do. So we'll see with the battery. It might be a little bit easier to understand a battery day versus an autonomous day. The other thing about autonomy days, this is my personal opinion. This might be heresy to Tesla enthusiasts, but I think that Tesla is much further away than what they're indicating with autonomy. I think they have a lot of work. I think that they're making significant progress. And
how dare you, sir?
I know.
Well, I think what you maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but the way I'm seeing, and I agree with you, by the way, that they may be 98% there, but that 2% chasm is gigantic. And so I think that unless you start talking geofencing and things like that, where you have a much more controlled environment, I agree. I think functionality, if you want to go out and drive and have it change lanes and keep you on a highway and do a long distance and be refreshed at the end of it, it's there. It's totally there. Is it going to take me outside of my house here in the mountains with no descript writings on my streets here? No, it's not going to get me where I want to go. But
the other piece that's a reality for us driving in Colorado is the snow. When you have an optical approach like that and you have snow and stuff that gets over the cameras, it doesn't know what to do. So how is Tesla going to solve the issue for people like us if the car is going to be autonomous or supposed to be autonomous, and you have any issues with those cameras? Right now, the front-facing cameras are fine because you have the wipers, but how do you address the issues with the other cameras, the other 6 cameras, when they get covered in gunk? A really simple example is if you're out driving in your Tesla and you either back into your garage or you're backing into a supercharger, I often find myself needing to stop, put it in park, go out, sort of, put some spit on my finger and wipe off the.
You're using your Mark II eyeballs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have to clean off the back camera so that I can see where I need to back up. And so it's a really simple example of how do you solve the issue of the car being able to use these cameras if that is the primary way that these cars are going to be autonomous.
Well, something I think about is my background is an airline pilot, and the airplane that I was last flying is one of the world's most advanced, an Airbus A320. So it's capable of doing landing in basically 0 visibility, much less than I can handle as a as a human. So it brings us down to the ground. Now there are certain identifiers that we need to be able to have to make that landing, and if they don't exist, then we can't do that level of automation dependency. But regardless, once touched the ground, we have to be able to manually take the aircraft and move. So we do have to have some sort of visibility out there. And where I want to tie this analogy into where I see autonomous driving going is that there are going to be things that take out the redundancy of the automation in a Tesla or any other vehicle, meaning that there's multiple cameras, but let's say the obscuration starts to affect these and you have a degradation in performance. Well, that degradation in performance is ultimately going to need a result in a buildup in a need for the human to take over. So that's where the disconnect is right now. It's not that the vehicle can't be controlled. It's when the analogy used of the Colorado obscurations or the snow, et cetera. As those things build, the need for the human comes in. So how do we get to that from that point to no human intervention? And that's full autonomy as far as I'm concerned. In other words, that gap between the need, you're always, anything mechanical, you're going to have a degradation. There's a potential for that. How do you build in that systems that allow for it to go from full automation to no need for a human?
Yeah, if you sort of break it down to a simple form, what do you need to address in order to get there? You need it to be safe. You need it to be as safe as possible for the people that are riding along in the car. And then you need it to be convenient. The convenience piece. Once you have the safety piece, then I think that it's going to be focused around convenience for the rider or the consumer. So I wonder, this I've never thought about this until you said that you flew planes. But is it possible that there would be a highway traffic control, some centralized place where you have humans that are overseeing maybe a region or area to make sure that these autonomous vehicles are doing what they should?
This was my thought, yeah. And it seems like it'd be easy for a vehicle, to be paying attention to the level of obscurity that's going on and put out, like if there's a person in the car, if we're going before the autonomous network, you're not going to be able to use autonomy on this drive unless you go clean the cameras right now. Seems like an easy alert to make. Or while you're driving, if they're starting to become obscured, letting the driver know, you have to take over and go park and clean the cameras.
Exactly.
But then on the autonomous network, you'll probably need humans managing a region of the network.
Well, it sounds like too, one of the catalysts within that is that the vehicles will be communicating with one another. And that's where 5G technology, I think, is going to have its most profound impact on autonomy, is the ability for you to build sort of your own mesh network. So I think that's going to be one level, and I think what you two both just mentioned, there will be some level of a ground-based air traffic controller that does manage the flow and whatever other things pop up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. I think that definitely there's going to be a pretty long period of time where you have to pay attention and you have to intervene,
Yeah.
Whether
or not that intervention, though, it has to occur by a human in the vehicle or by one of those ground-based controllers. That's the question, whether
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that's a thing or not. I'm just
I know that
kind of pulling that out of my ass.
I was kind of following Andrew Yang's bid for presidency, and he kept talking about how there's multiple firms in Silicon Valley that are working on beaming drivers into trucks for the last few miles. Maybe something like that would be possible. I know that's kind of out of left field, but
who knows? I think these things are being considered. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I this is incredibly interesting, but I got to get to this one thing about the Model Y. Have you heard about any special feature this thing might have? Not to put you on the spot.
Well, I think that many people are aware of some of the potential innovations of the Model Y. I think I know where you're going because I can look at the dry eraser board. But
What dry eraser board?
Yeah, never mind the man behind the curtain. But I think there's a few things we could talk about there.
Oh, sure.
You know, the heat pump thing. I don't fully understand it and how that's different from what they're already doing today. But it's an interesting one, and of course, people in cold climates will benefit from this if it is as they say, which is to improve the degradation of the battery in colder weather.
So as I understand batteries, and help me here if I'm wrong. When a battery gets colder, what the reason why, as I understand it, there is a decrease in range is that the energy within those cells becomes inaccessible. It's there, but it's inaccessible. And if you can keep that pack at a particular temperature, you can then access that additional energy that was stranded before. So I'm hearing, at least, the heat pump is a pretty nebulous thing. It's got a few people in a tailspin trying to explain exactly what it is, but I think it's a displacement of one temperature of air over here for another. And it doesn't matter how cold or how hot it is outside, as long as there's a differential. If you have a differential, then you can pump air one way or another to cool or to heat. And so it sounds like they're maybe getting those into the battery packs and bringing back that 30 or 40% loss in range, or at least some of it, is what we're hearing. I don't know. Are you hearing kind of same thing?
The battery packs do already have a mechanism to manage the temperature of the pack. It's a lot like human body. Human body doesn't like for it to be too hot or too cold, and so it's got these mechanisms that help with that. The human body does lose performance when it's in extreme temperatures. So that already exists today, and so I'm filling in the blanks here.
But only on the S and X, right? The 3 does not have that.
The 3 does have it. The 3 does have an active cooling system.
Oh, okay.
But also on the heating side, I mean, there is obviously, if you're driving in single digit temperatures and there was no active temperature management, you wouldn't be able to drive your car. You would have significant reduction in range. But so the heat pump is interesting, and maybe that adds an additional element that just works better, more effectively.
I see.
In colder weather.
Okay.
I'm just sort of picking out some things that I already know about the battery packs, and then applying it to this new news that we've heard about the heat pump. But
at any rate, all I want to make sure is that I can still go on my app and turn on the heat while it's in my garage.
Yeah.
That's all I care about.
Yeah.
So we can definitively say that still exists.
Yeah, I think so.
Any other magic about the Model Y?
I'm really curious about the reduction in the wiring. That's been another piece that sounds really interesting to me. How are they going to do that? Are they going to do that through Bluetooth communication? Are they going to do it securely? Of course, if you reduce the amount of wiring, you're increasing the speed of production. You're reducing the cost of the vehicle.
That's what I was going to ask. So, is it a reduction cost?
Right, yeah. So how are they going to do that, though? That's the big question, and I think we'll know a lot more about some of these innovations of production with the Model Y, and they'll probably be rolling this out to other vehicles when.
What's been said so far regarding the reduction in wiring? Well, what have you heard?
A significant. I don't remember the actual amounts, but a significant decrease in the amount of wires used to communicate from system to system intally.
This is something that Tesla announced directly through
patents.
Got
filings.
it.
Yeah, I believe it's patent filings.
You can learn a lot by patent filings, can't you?
You can. In fact, I actually think that Elon has talked about their improvements in length of wiring from S and X to Model 3, but I think that there's an even better step improvement with the Model Y. So that's one piece, and then there's a lot of talk about the improvement in panels, reducing the number of panels needed for the Model Y. So that could be another interesting piece. We've heard as well from patent filings that they filed a patent to reduce the stamping machine from 70 or so parts down to 1. So there may be some innovations there.
That's amazing.
That we might see when someone like Sandy Munro gets their vehicles and tears it apart and figures out what they've done to make it better.
Was that a trip interviewing him? I'm sorry, I just got to ask.
He's a great guy. He's a very down-to-earth guy. You wouldn't know if you just met him on the street or you ran into him at a coffee shop, you wouldn't know how important he was because he just has a very down-to-earth Midwest casual approach. He's not big city, flashy. He probably does quite well for himself, especially working with these important companies, very, very powerful companies. But he drives a Jeep Rubicon.
Have you been to his website?
Modest. What's that?
Have you been to his website?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's sort of it exudes exactly what you're saying, like kind of like Paul Graham, the investor, Y Combinator guy. He has his blog that everybody in the world that wants to be a startup guy reads, and it's like the most basic form of code known to man.
He's not egocentric at all.
I love it.
He's the antithesis of Elon. He is probably on the opposite end, but he knows what he's talking about. And I would even go so far as to say, aside from employees at Tesla, anyone who works at Tesla, he probably knows the most about electric vehicles and particularly Tesla.
Wow.
He's exceptionally knowledgeable. He's got a great team as well. It's not just him, but he's got a really great team that each has their own specialty when it comes to the electric vehicles. But yeah, he's to get back to your question, he's very approachable. Occasionally we're emailing back and forth. In fact, I had some people ask me on Twitter, when is Sandy going to be doing his breakdown of the Model Y? So I reached out to him and asked him. So I got a reply back after a few days, and he said that he's got 2 on order, which should be delivered in early April. So I think that the fun is going to come very soon. Do
you know how long it takes him to
That's my question.
Yeah, sorry, Kyle.
I have no clue. Months, probably. I would. I mean,
with the degree of detail that he does it,
they
pretty
go
spectacular.
Deep. I mean, it's not just taking apart the vehicles; it's analyzing the systems, but also figuring out what the cost is per part, wholesale part, and then figuring out what the profit margins are on the entire car.
Jeez.
So so what I expect for him to do with this is they will analyze it. They'll put it together in a nice paper, and then they're going to sell that paper to other automakers because other automakers are curious to know.
Absolutely.
They do that all the time. This is a common thing in the automotive industry.
Right.
Automotive industry, it does these things. They'll either do it themselves or they'll pay big bucks to companies like Sandy Monroe's to do it for them.
Yeah.
And then they just, they review the reports. So super exciting. Really exciting.
I would just want to sit in the room and drink beers while they're doing disassembly.
Yeah, that wouldn't be so bad. Well, we got you here. Let's talk something. I think this would be, it's important right now to kind of induce our calm about the markets and about EVs in general. And one of the things that comes to mind for me, while companies like Tesla and others that are interested in EV are making huge strides, when the markets fail like they currently are, it can make those same businesses feel very vulnerable to somehow, maybe they don't have enough cash to weather the storm and so on and so forth. But one of the catalysts I personally believe in this market is not just, the coronavirus, not just maybe just leadership in a particular country, but it's also this sort of war that's going on with Russia and Saudi Arabia over energy. Particularly fossil fuels. And in the past, like I can think 5 or 10 years ago where if you put a bunch of downward pressure on prices at the pump, more people are going to go buy gas. But I feel like, and I hope you back me up on this, but I feel like things are different now. $1.50 gas isn't going to cause people to turn away from EVs. Am I right? Or where do you see all this energy war going and low fuel prices, high fuel prices?
That's a really good question. I haven't put a whole lot of thought into it, so I'll see if I can just sort of talk off the cuff about it. I see it going either way.
Yeah.
Less expensive fuel could mean that automakers have an even greater drive to produce larger vehicles at a less expensive price. And if it's more affordable for consumers to buy these larger vehicles because of the fuel price, you could have an unintended negative impact on where a lot of people want to go in terms of a little bit more of a sustainable forms of transportation. But pushing up also on the other side is, can these companies in the petroleum industry weather through the low below $30 a barrel prices? They're probably going to have to lay some people off, which has a negative impact on the economy. Some of these companies may not be able to make it, depending on how they manage their finances. So you've got that piece as well. But as we were talking about earlier, a disruption like the coronavirus could be the thing that is needed to see acceleration in electric vehicles. It could be the thing that sort of pushes a lot of capital investment into the right things at the right time. The biggest factor, I think, is driving down the cost of the batteries. And that's something that companies like Tesla are thinking about. They're probably the market leader, the thought leader in this. And so it does position Tesla in a really good way, I think, if they can have enough cash to be able to continue to fund these projects. So, it could go either way. It could work to the advantage of automakers producing internal combustion engines. When was the last time that we had such low prices? Was it during the 2008 recession? Or I certainly remember 99-cent fuel in the late 90s.
I think that's where. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Kyle. That's where I remember.
Yeah,
it.
that's where I would have gone too. So it's been a long time.
It's been a long time, and funny enough, the way you just said that, it made me think. Why? Like when I go and now we're fortunate. These things sitting over here to your right are connected to my solar that we have in our home. But even without using solar, like you could say, okay, I'm getting fuel for free in my wife's car. If we charge this at night, it's 9 cents per kilowatt hour. And my wife's 65-mile trip, I think, is somewhere around 13 kilowatt hours necessary. So, if you do the math on that, you're a little over $1 to do 65 miles. And that the gas is, if it gets to that level in today's economics, first off, it's my personal belief that Saudi Arabia can bury Russia in this war. But what they're really trying to do, I think, is bury shale in U.S. Because that's a leveraged market. But if you get anywhere near those prices to extract the same amount of value in an ICE vehicle, both of those entities, Saudi Arabia as well as Russia, are seriously harmed. So to me, the point is that I think EVs, maybe the conversation should be, look how inexpensive electricity is to do this, even in a place where it's relatively expensive. It seems like that's the narrative that maybe should be pushed.
I think the energy needed to power an electric vehicle certainly is very compelling. You also have, though, the purchase price, the entry price of an electric vehicle is good. It's getting better, but it's still quite high.
Yeah.
You have $30,000 to $40,000 electric vehicles, which are good, but really where I think the range needs to be is what Tesla is offering at their $80,000 price point. To get back to something that you sort of segued into or hinted at, in terms of range, more is better if you can do it in an efficient way. So I would love to see, personally, range of vehicles be comparable to how much you can go on a single tank of gas. Right now, we're looking at between 400 and 600 miles, depending on the gasoline vehicle. So I do think that there's still some work there for many people for that middle of the bell curve of adoption of electric vehicles. In order to get that mass market, I do think that you need something that is, between 400 and 600 miles of range. With what Tesla's working on, it seems like they might have figured that out, and hopefully that the whole auto industry benefits from that as Tesla continues to mostly single-handedly drive down the cost of batteries. So we'll see. We're in a really interesting time here. We could see things favor gasoline, or we could see this shift, as I was talking about earlier, where it makes more sense to just swing towards electrification even more.
Well, it sounds like that at that number, you've solved range anxiety. I already feel like you do now that I'm an owner and we can charge every night, but you've solved it. So the on the fence folks are there, but maybe extrapolate it out. Like one of the things that's really popular in Europe and the UK is you heard of a hot hatch?
No.
Basically, it's a tiny little GTI, smaller than a GTI even. And those are, if Europe could have one vehicle, that would be the vehicle they would have. But the problem has been so far to really bring one of those to market in an affordable way is that battery density. You can't get a whole lot of range in a very small vehicle, 100 to 150 miles of range. But that's changing, and when that happens, so like if we do get to the 400 and 500 or 600 mile range in a medium-sized vehicle, extrapolated down, you get 250 miles of range in a hot hatch, and that's it. That's the name of the game. That fills in your $25,000, price point, and I think that's certainly Tesla and everybody else, VW, have got to be aiming for that, wouldn't you think? Like,
yeah, they understand their market's the best, and outside of North America, the smaller vehicles are probably the more appealing vehicles, and I think Model 3 is definitely scratching that market potential in places like Europe. So I'm very curious about Model Y, and I think people could be interested in this one as well quite a bit, in Europe in particular.
Well, the crossover market is massive, right? Compared to the sedan markets.
Absolutely.
Quite a bit bigger.
Yeah.
Globally, too. It's not just in the U.S., as I understand it.
Yeah.
I think we've grown it from here. I think the genesis is that it started here in the U.S., but as we fell in love with it, so shall others, I think is what has occurred there. So,
Absolutely. Actually, this is another interesting thing that I think people might be interested in hearing. These topics about electric vehicles and Tesla is not my day job. It's not a thing that pays the bills. And so it is still a very small portion of what I spend my time on. But the interesting component to this is my real estate world, which is what I spend most of my time on in this EV world, are starting to intersect. And that's a really interesting thing to see and sort of observe as someone who's in the middle of it, because as you said earlier regarding your solar on your house, that is a piece, that is a part of your real estate investment. You have also electrical charging as well.
Absolutely.
Where you're charging your vehicle inside of your garage. And pretty soon I'm sure you'll have some stationary storage to be able to store that energy. And so all of these, and I never planned for this. It looks really intelligent, at surface level, that it's like these things are really converging. And I'm as a real estate agent at the front end of this. I don't know any other. I have some friends who were doing similar things, but I don't know any other real estate agent who knows as much about how these things intersect as I do. And the point of me sharing that is not to impress you, but to impress upon you that we're seeing this transition as well in real estate too, where homeowners home shoppers will see a value in homes that will that have solar, that have battery storage, and then have electrical charging to charge vehicles. The more people drive electric vehicles. So, does it increase the value of a home? That, I've got some thoughts on that. But, will that be a marketing lift for the real estate agent who's selling a property with these things?
It would be for me.
As it stands, like, my wife and I talk about putting solar on our house, and one of the questions that comes up that I've yet to do any research on is, how does it affect the value of the home? And is this just kind of money spent, or is this going into my net worth in some indirect way?
Yeah, I did a video on this back in December because I personally wanted to know, does adding solar increase the value of a home? And what I ultimately determined is it depends on what your definition of value is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have bank value, you have government or appraised. You have appraised value, which would be bank value. You have assessed value, which would be government value, and then you have market value. This is how I set it up in the video. When you're talking about market value, there is statistically here in the Denver metro area, I actually pulled the sales numbers of homes of similar square footage that sold with solar and ones that didn't. And there is I think it was somewhere, it was less, it was under 5% that it added value, but that will probably change over time. My prediction is, again, as more people drive and buy electric vehicles, it's going to start people down the mental road of, number one, how can I reduce my electricity cost? Number two, there may be some environmental motivations as well for some people, not for everyone, and I understand that. And most real estate clients that I work with, the environment is not top of mind. Mm-hmm. But economics, I think, are relevant to everyone. How can I reduce my electricity cost? And how can I add additional value to the home? So at some point, you might be able to get a one for $1 back from some of these things because it covers. I mean, here's the one thing that we haven't talked about, which I think will really have a profound impact on real estate value, and it's solar roof.
Absolutely.
You're addressing the fact that you need a roof anyway.
Yeah,
and when you need
durability.
to replace the shingles or the tiles or whatever, why not add the solar element to it, and then it's more durable than current asphalt shingle or tile, and it's giving you that solar energy too.
Let me give you the math just real quick, because I think that a lot of people would. You really kind of touched on something very interesting about real estate, and we're just now in mass starting to adopt EV, just now. And so if you're contemplating a home like mine, I have a fairly large system. It's about 12.5 kilowatts. So I produce, based on our energy rates from Excel here in Colorado, on average, about $500 worth of energy a month. That's a lot. And if you just think about amortizing that out, so that's $6,000 a year over a 10-year period, $60,000 worth if the prices stayed where they are today. That's essentially the same as going to the pump or anything else. That's $60,000 worth of value I can make in 10 years' time at a conservative rate. It's probably substantially more than that. And that's here. So
what's the price of that system? Ballpark?
To get that right now through Tesla is about $35,000.
Okay.
That size of it. They call it their XL or L or whatever, and that's even going to be, they're making advancements in their solar efficiency as well. But right now, that's roughly what that would cost. So if you have a couple of EVs, if you have a couple of power walls that can store that energy overnight, and you can charge your vehicles while you're, sleeping or whatever. Now you can in real time see, it's just like it's the equivalent of having the gas pump on. You can see the energy flowing in out of your car, the dollar value of it, and it's real. You've got like my solar roof is a fuel station for my whole house and my vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's magnificent. And that's, like you said, you weren't really quantifying the social or the sustainable aspects. I do care greatly about that. We all do at our hearts. But economics are the first thing people see. And I can elucidate for them straight away. The economic value in today's world is, when you factor in EVs, it's there.
Sure.
You've got this sort of push and pull, or this working at both ends. You have, how much money is this going to save me as a homeowner? But you also have, how much is this system going to cost? And that is falling gradually, month by month,
absolutely,
year by year. And at a certain point, it will be as ubiquitous as asphalt shingles that are, the most affordable,
exactly,
incredibly inexpensive. It's remarkable. Like when you compare a solar system, solar panels that you put on your roof to asphalt shingles. I mean, you can get asphalt shingle roof for around $10,000, and you're talking about a system that's solar panels at $35,000. The solar roof is going to be more expensive early on.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to be close to double what it is for solar panels. So it won't quite. It'll take a while to drive down that cost, but just because it's more expensive now, and this is an objection that I hear all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're more expensive than electric vehicles are more expensive than gasoline cars, so it makes the technology null. Maybe at the present time, but just like what we've seen with TVs and phones and computers, and I mean, I think the three of us are probably old enough to remember in the early 80s or mid 80s, the phones that you had to carry in the bag, right? Like that was the cutting edge technology. You take that bag and you put it into the car, and then you take the big old phone out.
Remember the curly Q antenna you would stick out there? How you were signaling to the rest of the world that you were a badass?
Right. Yeah, the ultimate 1980s flex.
Exactly.
So, that gave way for what we all enjoy today in mobile devices. And so you have to have that perspective that if there is enough demand, if the product is valuable enough, if there's enough value and convenience that is created for consumers, prices for electric vehicles, for solar, for home battery storage won't be the same price today what they will be in the future. They will continue to fall, and it will be it's economics. And I'm not an economist, but I do understand business, and I do understand economies of scale, and these things I think will be far more common, and you will find this window, back to this sort of real estate topic, you will find this window where homes that have these things will be the sort of the marketing buzzword.
Yep.
Very similar to, making another sort of like past reference here. If you remember back in the 2000s, cafes would market free Wi-Fi. Remember free Wi-Fi?
Totally.
It's like the thing to get people in.
Free electricity.
I think,
Go even further back. Look at the hotels on Colfax, and they'll say color TV.
Yes, exactly. So I think that solar roof or solar panels and electric vehicle charging stalls will be there'll be this window where if you have it as a homeowner, it will be the marketing hook to get more for your house.
So Sean, do you think the financing options is going to be a big part of this conversation as well? Like for me, if I can finance this in a way where I've got this payment on my solar system now, but it's lower than my electricity bill used to be, I'm in. So wouldn't a lot of people be that way? And I would imagine when you're dealing that closely to homes, if people have some equity, maybe they can borrow against that, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was one of the success pillars of Solar City when they were operating, is that they would guarantee that your monthly cost to finance or lease the solar panels would be at or below the cost of your electricity bill. So I do think that's a good strategy. One of the things to keep in mind, as speaking from a real estate professional, is if you have financed or leased those panels or roof, and you go to sell it, there could be some negative headwind to that, because if you're a buyer looking at that house, you may see that as incurring an additional cost. The other thing to keep in mind too is when you go to sell this, and that buyer is financing the majority of that home purchase, the lender will also factor that monthly payment of solar into how much the buyer can afford to borrow.
Exactly.
So, two things. If you go to sell, keep in mind that it may be ideal for you to, number one, pay it off before you put it on the market, or make sure your agent communicates in the listing that the money owed on that system will be paid off at the time of closing by the seller.
Absolutely.
So some real I think things to think about, from a homeowner perspective. Is it the right time? Should you do it? Can you afford it? It can work as a great marketing ploy to market your house as the house that has zero electricity cost, powering your house by sunshine. But also keep in mind that if you have financed this and you still owe a significant amount of money, that it could work to you. It could work to a disadvantage and be less appealing to a buyer.
Huh. So in that case, then they would kind of price the purchase price. The purchase price they would factor in what the payoff amount would be.
Yeah. So hopefully, as a seller, you have enough equity built in your home to be able to take the net proceeds of the sale of that house and then pay off the solar. So you could be in a situation where if you've purchased a house and you find out that you need to sell the house 12 months later. I've got a buyer who's needing to he's selling his house, about 12 months after he purchases. So he doesn't have as much equity built. And in fact, I think it's going to be a loss for him to sell this, but it's going to get him to where he needs to be long term. But if you don't have the equity built, you could be in a challenging situation where you're going to have to come up with that money, or the buyer's going to back out and say, I'm not going to pay for that solar system. If you're not going to pay for it, I'm not going to buy the house.
I think, if I'm not mistaken here, Tesla either has or will be introducing subscriptions, which change the economic dynamic to where it is just simply a monthly payment, no strings attached. I'm assuming that they make it so compelling that the future buyer rather, will not be inhibited by. There's no obligation other than to make a monthly payment, and it outweighs your energy bill by a fairly strong amount. But I don't know how valuable those are right now. The subscription.
Yeah, they do offer that subscription right now on their website. My only question is, what happens if that person decides that they don't want the subscription anymore? There is some capital investment into the actual home from Tesla's perspective, where they're installing this. If the homeowner says, I don't want it anymore, does the company come back out and remove the solar?
Yeah, or do they just let it sit up there like your old Dish Network thing might sit up there? And,
right.
And,
I mean, it's pretty significant investment on the company's part. So at what point does Tesla break even with that if it's just sitting there waiting to be reactivated by someone in the future? I'm not sure how that
the
works.
argument, the bit that I've heard behind it is that Tesla has managed to make the economics on their side so compelling that they're so attractive that it would be an outlier who says, I don't want to continue that. I don't want to continue with that. And maybe through that math, they decided, well,
we can eat those.
We can eat those, yeah.
Right.
I don't know if that's the case, but that's kind of my.
Well, I mean, I have to think about worst case scenarios. What happens if the company needs to come back out, and as the homeowner, you now are left with these holes that have been drilled into your roof. How do you fill that? I'm guessing there's probably a way to cover those, but you've compromised the structure of the house.
Yeah.
As a real estate professional, I do think about that because
Sure.
the worst thing that you want as a homeowner is to have a significant part of your structure compromised. So you're having to worry about leaks, water damage, mold.
I would assume something like that is going to be. You're concerned as a real estate professional. The person that is liable for that, the insurance companies, are going to have a very strong vested interest that ceiling doesn't leak, the roof doesn't leak, et cetera. So, it wouldn't surprise me if Tesla's already worked with industry insurance and they've come up with some sort of, I wouldn't even call it a doomsday scenario, but their scenario of people going, nah, we don't want this. There's magical nuclear energy now, and we want nothing to do with this sort of thing. So, yeah, who knows? It's something I want to learn more about, though. We need to dig that up.
Agree.
So, Sean, if you're good, we'll wrap it up here. I do want to tell our listeners, and of course your listeners, where they can find you. Most people already know, but Sean Mitchell, if you just go to YouTube, he's got a wonderful channel there where he talks all things EV, batteries, et cetera, and well beyond any capacity we have here. That's just searching Sean Mitchell on YouTube. Also, you have a website that is allthingsev.info. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, and of course, in his real estate empire, you've got Sean M. SeanMMitchell.com. SeanM Mitchell.com.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been fantastic having you on here. We hope
you.
we can get you back, and
Of course.
we'll talk solar energy and anything else that we haven't fully covered today.
There's never a lack of things to talk about when it comes to Tesla.
No, that's true.
For better or worse. So we could probably come back in a month and there would be a whole new set of topics that we could wrap on for an hour.